Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Get Informed with Waji. Today we have a very special guest, former U.S. diplomat John Elliott. He has been involved in human rights for quite some time. He's a photographer, an artist, and a writer. He has his own blog with Human Pulse. Same thing with his Twitter account, The Human Pulse. Welcome to the talk show, Mr. John. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview. Um, and it's such an honor to have you on our platform on Twitter Spaces.
Thank you, Ouija. It's an honor to
Oh,
be here.
Waji. Yes. Mr. John, I'd love to start with a little bit about your background, a little bit about um, your education, just to catch everyone up about who you are and what you do. Um, could you tell us a little bit about yourself uh, for our audiences, especially from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Middle East?
Certainly, I grew up in Manhattan, New York City, and it was a time of a lot of action and activity on the civil rights and human rights front because it was during the Vietnam War protests, and I witnessed a lot of that from my window in Manhattan. Different activist marches, and I also went to a school across from Columbia University where there were a lot of activist demonstrations. And so, as a youngster, that sort of set the scene for me to understand the world is in turmoil, but that I can not only be an observer, but a participant in positive change. And I became very interested in photography when my family and I moved to Miami, Florida, and I decided to go down to the 1972 Republican and Democratic conventions in Miami Beach and document it photographically. And there again, I was witness to a lot of activity and began to understand some of the positions of activists. And so when I decided to choose a college, a university, I wanted to go to a university that had a good journalism and photography curriculum. And I chose Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. And during that time, not only did I study photography, but I also branched out into a number of other areas and started studying Arabic and North African history. And I joined the Student Senate and I became the Commissioner for Minority and Women's Affairs and sponsored a number of activities that were supporting gay rights and human rights and civil rights, and slowly educated myself on a number of positions, began to meet a number of gay activists, and made wonderful friends with gays at the university. And in fact, the godfather of my oldest daughter is a gay man. And this was also during the difficult time, the opening of the tragic experiences with AIDS. And so my friend, who was the godfather, he contracted AIDS. And also my uncle, who was a single man, much older, who was in World War II, he contracted AIDS. And within 2 years, both of them died. And so the tragedy of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s touched me personally in this and other ways. And so as I left the university, I knew that I wanted to continue my photographic experiences and my passion in fine arts photography specifically. And in my 20s, I went on a journey, a personal journey across the Sahara Desert. And traveled throughout various Mediterranean countries under very difficult circumstances. And this is a period of great spiritual growth for me. When
What kind of difficulties were you facing when you say it was in very difficult circumstances? That's very intriguing for a lot of the listeners, I bet. What kind of difficulties were you facing traveling through the Middle East and the Mediterranean?
Well, not only were the hardships very difficult because I was hitchhiking and it was extremely hot and I had almost no money. I was living on some money that was loaned to me from my mother and credit cards. But also, I was coming to grips with how I would deal with the hypocrisy in my own life, which was that I am compassionate to humans and animals, but yet I was eating animals. I was not a vegetarian or a vegan. And so, my family, meat was very important. And so, I knew that I wanted to make some changes in my life, but I just couldn't seem to come to be able to do it until I crossed the Sahara Desert and I found out that a very close friend of mine passed away, and I was just grief stricken, and I resolved that this was a opportunity for me to make this seismic change in my life, and I never touched any meat or fish or animal product again since that time. So when I came back a completely changed person in many ways. And I embarked on a career in corporate communications, and I did that for about 12 years. And then I quit a Fortune 500 company that I had been working for, and I started my own advertising and marketing company in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm only mentioning this because this gave me the opportunity to be a single parent and devote myself pretty much full time to raising my daughter, Danielle, and focusing on her life and her spiritual and intellectual growth until she went to college. And then I decided that I wanted to try a different career. And I took the exams for the U.S. Foreign Service, not thinking that I would do very well, but because for one reason or another, I'm very knowledgeable about a wide variety of things. So I have a wide range of knowledge, but on a superficial level. And this was enough for me to pass the written exam and then go on to the other tests and the battery of tests that took about 9 months. Um, and so I joined the Foreign Service in early 2011. And my first assignment was to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Now, I had been activist for removing borders and removing restrictions to travel because I think that this is inhumane that we would have borders and passports. And I even wrote a poem and a song. But ironically, I was assigned to be a consular officer for 2 years. So I had to determine whether or not various Brazilians would be allowed to get visas to travel to the United States. So this was the universe's way of seeking a reckoning for me. I adjudicated more than 23,000 cases, and I got into trouble frequently with the supervisors because I would give visas to elderly people who wanted to visit their family members in the USA, and they didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have what were called bona fide ties, but I would give them visas. And conversely, the rich people who were going to the USA frequently but had no reason to do it or were lying on their applications, I would catch them in lies and I would deny them visas and get their visas revoked. So I was bucking the trend, and this wasn't very good for my career, but it was an enormously meaningful experience for me during that 2 years. And my punishment, so to speak, was to be sent to Saudi Arabia, which was not the most uh, pleasant reputation, but I look forward to it because I like uh, different experiences. And so,
Before before we go to Saudi Arabia, I remember in a previous conversation that we had that at one point you did go to Harvard and decided to drop out to go to the Foreign Service. Do I remember that correctly, John?
oh, actually, Harvard University was in my undergraduate years. I went to Harvard to continue my studies in Arabic, and so I
Oh,
didn't.
wow.
I just took a series of courses there and got involved in various extracurricular activities, but I didn't go there for a degree or anything. I returned to Ohio University to uh, take graduate courses. So this was just that was just a series of studies that I did in the Arabic language, and the Arabic actually helped me very much in getting into the Foreign Service because that's a hardship language, or it's a
Hmm.
hard, it's a difficult language, and there's a great demand for people who can read it and speak it. So no, I didn't. I never dropped out of anything. My studies also continued at the uh, Foreign Service School in Arlington, Virginia. I took a series of courses there over 5 or 6 years, on and off, as I was a diplomat. So that was sort of postgraduate courses in various things, including Portuguese and Spanish and Arabic and diplomatic studies, uh, public affairs, things like that. So I don't have a conventional academic background.
Most successful people don't actually. That's not an issue. I was just curious because I knew that you went to Harvard. Now, Saudi Arabia is where we first met. You and I ran in together um, through a mutual friend. I think it was Sam, and that was my first interaction with you. I thought bringing a cigar box would be appropriate, but little I knew that you don't smoke and you're a vegan. Um, no one told me that before I met you. I'd have brought a way better gift, honestly. But I think one of my most informative one-on-one regarding organizing and regarding understanding a little bit about American liberalism was when I first met you in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, in a compound where you and your wife were staying then. And I believe that you even had the food, vegan food, shipped all the way from the United States to Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
I'd love to hear about your experience there. I know you adopted a cat or two as well from there. I'd love to hear what got you to adopting those two cats, and I'd love to hear about your experience in Saudi Arabia and how that may have opened doors or knowledge for you as later on you have posted pretty big important stories regarding human rights violations there. But before we get there, definitely want to get to have your human interaction in the kingdom. I remember you had amazing photos taken during Ramadan as well, in the historic Jeddah. So you've had amazing interactions with the Saudis, and you've came up with amazing photography. I'd love to learn more about your journey there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a very exciting experience, culturally eye opening. Of course, I knew a lot about Islam and I knew the language, although I didn't know the Hijazi dialect until I got there and started learning that aspect. But Becky and I really embraced the culture. We stayed away from the enclave of the compound and we got out into the city and into the throughout the country. I was able to visit the city of Medina and Mecca. Although I didn't go into the holy mosques, I was able to get some insights into Islam that few Westerners or non-Muslims have gotten. And again, as a my position there was the press attaché, and again, I would get myself into trouble, maybe what the civil rights activist John Lewis called good trouble, because I would want to go into the mosques and meet the imams and interact with them as on an official basis, but also a personal basis, because I think that it was important as a diplomat to open bridges of communications. And then the various security officers in the embassy and the consulate would scold me because they said you shouldn't go there. There are terrorists. You know, ISIS was surging then. I said no. This is a very positive experience, and if I were a Muslim, I should be allowed to go in anyway, even though I'm not a Muslim. So I would go against the grain frequently, but it was very insightful to hear firsthand the perspective of Muslims and learn a lot more about the Quran and the the spiritual writings. And even though I do not agree with a lot of what I learned, I try to be open and honest about it. I didn't agree with the Sharia interpretation. I didn't agree with a lot of the very draconian and abusive policies of the imams and the mullahs in the Islamic world. But at least I could say that I understood them from a position of inspection and knowledge instead of just being a bigot. And so one day I heard that a blogger who was a dissident, uh, his name is Raif Badawi, I heard that he was going to be flogged or whipped in the public square in Jeddah, and without any permission from any of the authorities at the embassy, I went there on my own, and I was able to observe this horrendous experience of the painful and humiliating punishment of this innocent person. His only crime was that he had very creative writings pointing out the hypocrisy of the royalty, the Saudi royalty, and the policies there, and that was his only crime. In any democratic country, there would be no problem with this, and it would be part of the exchange of information and knowledge. But he was severely punished, and he was given not only uh, a sentence of 1,000 lashes, but he no, it was not 1,000 lashes. It was 500 lashes, but over a period of 10 weeks. So it was 50 lashes per week. And so he was sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment, and also a fine of many millions of dollars. So watching this, and I was the only Westerner there, I believe, in the audience of 500 collected at that central square in front of the mosque. So I not only dared to be there, but I also dared to photograph it and document it. And when I came back the next day to my work, I told my boss, and she was horrified. She said, "You can't tell anybody this. This could be a major scandal and cause break in relations and blah, blah, blah." So during the time that I was at with the Saudi embassy, I had to keep this fact.
So the U.S. government was more worried about messing U.S. Saudi relations rather than uh, covering, or even though the White House at the time was in big disagreement about that punishment and that arrest with Raif Badawi. I strongly remember the Biden administration, not Biden, the Obama administration coming out and being against that. It's interesting to see that the institution of the State Department wasn't having it at the time. My question to you is that um, what was your mission as an attaché, and what was your personal goal in being there as trying to make a difference? Because I'm sensing there's this Vietnam War um, activism and organizing that probably pumped up all over you, in your veins, thinking this is very horrible. Why am I watching this? I really want to get to understand that from you.
Well, I had a personal mission and I had a professional mission, and they often conflicted. And I'm amazed that I wasn't drummed out of the Foreign Service. I think that the only metaphor I can think of is a surfer who is riding the tip of a wave and doesn't get submerged by the huge waves that were coming at me. Uh, because I'm fairly proficient in defending myself, I had to defend myself a number of ways with the Foreign Service so that I wouldn't get sent home. And I was able to craft various documents and also go through some uh, legal remedies so that I wasn't ejected from the Foreign Service. So that my personal mission there, as it always, is to be a real person and to connect with the real people. I'm not interested in connecting with royalty, although while I was in Saudi Arabia, I was in the presence of King Salman and his predecessor, and also in the presence of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman on a couple of occasions in Riyadh. That didn't interest me. The things that interest me are connecting with the people who are in the alleys and the back darker corners of Saudi society, the expats and the poor people. And so that's if you look at
That
my
we usually call them Bidun without any legal documents.
yeah. And so my photographs and my photographic excursions oftentimes took me to very dangerous parts of the country and many other countries. So that's really what I'm all about is connecting with the real people who are having difficulties and suffering. And you mentioned the cats. The cats in many poor countries and developing countries are pets are not known, and they are just treated like insects. And so when I saw that in Saudi Arabia, I would feed them, and then so I would adopt them and take care of them. And same thing with my wife. And so at one time we had a number of cats in our very lavish apartment that was paid for by the U.S. government. When I returned, we came back with two Saudi cats that we decided to keep, and I still have one of them. And so, animal rights, animal welfare to me is very close to human rights. I don't see such a distinction. I think there's a causal relationship between humans and all and non-human animals.
I agree with you 100%. And I think one of my first learning experiences with you on that was uh, you responding to a couple of my posts on Facebook a couple of years ago, or more than 6 years ago, probably, um, about me posting some uh, video of slaughtering a goat, and you explained it to me that it's as horrifying to watch that as is to watching a human get slaughtered. And that took me a minute to analyze. That took me a minute to understand. But that was one of my first experiences recognizing that. Uh, I think your mission didn't stop there because I remember you reached out to me when I was a student at Kent State University, and you wanted another way for the Saudi American community to interact and come closer together. And you asked me for a photography project showing the Saudi students who are on uh, culture mission scholarships interacting with their colleagues from American universities. What was the idea behind that project, and why, and how did it make a difference with bringing the Saudi American culture together? And do we need to do more of that?
Yeah, so part of my job as press attaché and information officer was uh, to work on the social media for the mission, the Saudi mission, the embassy and the consulates. And so I realized that it was a very low interaction, very low amount of engagement. And I knew from my marketing and advertising background that one of the ways that you can overcome problems like that is to open up new segments. And I mentioned that I connected with the Saudi conservatives in the religious community, and that was very positive. We got a lot of new followers and made more bridges to communication, but also the students who were in the USA and Western countries were exposed, perhaps for the first time, to what honest and uh, real truth is, and they were open. They were for the first time exposed to a wide variety of information. So I knew that for our social media, we wanted to connect with the students, the students who were being allowed into the USA and other countries, and who were being allowed by the Saudi government to travel overseas. The women, of course, had their mahrams who would have to supervise them, but the young men who were students had a lot more freedom. And so this was one way to increase engagement for our social media and also to bridge new communications with the what are ostensibly American values. A lot of American values, as we know, are just lipstick on the pig. It's it's very easy for a lot of Americans to be zealous about American values and not know their history and even the recent developments, which are horrendous in the political imprisonment of people in the USA continues. The hypocrisy and the abuse of other humans in other countries, the drone strikes on civilians, and the horrible connection that our government has with the military industrial establishment, the provision of arms to throughout the world, which provides for the slaughter of millions of innocents, and the the whole
Hmm.
usurpation of
Hmm.
so that we don't even recognize it as any positive values. If you really look below the surface, it's inhumane. The fact that our arms, the Western arms industries, and especially the USA, it's inhumane how we are participating in the slaughter of innocents. And I say the NRA is America's ISIS,
Hmm.
enabler of mass terrorism and and mass destruction and mass death.
Well, the Biden administration, one of the main reasons for visiting the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was reported to be building a stronger military connection with the Saudi government. Now, a lot of the critics that support the Saudi government and criticize what we say will say that, well, Saudi Arabia is changing, it's improving, it has been modernizing itself, it has allowed women to start working. Why are you still attacking the kingdom? Do you think that Saudi Arabia is changing? What kind of change do we really need to see there? Are you still in contact with people in the kingdom?
Sure, through social media, I'm in contact with a number of people in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I still believe, Saudi Arabia is not an outlier. There are probably the vast majority of nations. They put on a good public relations face, but behind that, they're concerned with making money for those who support their governments and support their politicians. In the case of Saudi Arabia, arms have been going for 8 or 9 years to commit genocide on the Houthis to the south of Saudi Arabia, uh, commit genocide against the Yemeni people, and fostering a situation of disease and starvation for many years. So I don't understand how we can be bedfellows with such a horrendous regime. There's no justification for it. The only thing that is justifying it is the money paid by lobbyists to politicians so that they can secure votes, and also the primacy of the Zionist approach to our international relations. And I speak as somebody with a Jewish background and somebody who is proud of my Jewish culture. I'm not anti Semitic at all, but I know that the fact that Zionism has run rampant and contaminated our public policy since 1948 has been the cause of horrible difficulties and savage results throughout the world. The war in Iraq and the invasion of many countries like Afghanistan are a direct result of Israel's domination of our public policy and our international affairs. And I don't only resent that, I decry it.
I'd love to cover, touch up a little bit about that because I feel I was talking to another friend of mine, Elise Max, which is the director for Missourians for Alternative to the Death Penalty, a friend of mine. I was trying to explain to her that a lot of Arabs confuse anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, and she told me funny thing that also Jewish people struggle with recognizing the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Do you mind taking a minute covering that for the listeners that are from the Middle East and still don't know what the difference is and how that can make a difference? Because many times they do hear people can say, "Yes, I'm originally, or I have a Jewish background, and yes, I am anti-Zionists." What is the debate that is even between these conversations, Mr. John?
Well, one can be anti Zionist, especially the Zionism practiced since the turn of the last century, the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century. The fact is that the abuse of the Palestinians, hold on, my 5-year-old daughter is coming in here. The abuse of the Palestinians is, and the humiliation of Palestinians specifically, has been a, a real problem for Arabs and Muslims throughout the Arab world. And so when they see on a daily basis how Palestinians are being subjugated to apartheid conditions and are being mercilessly slaughtered in Gaza, it's very easy to understand why the various terrorist groups like Al Qaeda and Al Shabaab and ISIS began to emerge, and it's easy to understand why Bin Laden would consider killing thousands of people in the 9/11 attacks. It's and the other attacks that were occasioned against Western people. Uh, the the fact is that 9/11 is a result of Israel's abusive policies. And so there's a direct connection. And I'm not the only one to say this. This is something that has been espoused by many scholars and editors. Uh, we can't just take these terrible experiences in a vacuum. We have to understand the antecedents and the foundations. And so, as a
I
person,
believe even the CIA at some point had an equation for each person they kill who's innocent by a drone or airplane strike generates so many terrorist members. So I definitely think that what you're saying has a lot of echo in the international community. Now, with the Saudi claiming that they are having many changes, allowing difference of opinion or allowing more rights for women, have your contact uh, verified any of these information in the kingdom, or is it mostly um, propaganda news?
well, it's lip service. It's a public relations campaign. Yes, Saudi women are given certain freedoms that they didn't have a decade ago, but it's must be very damning to be a Saudi woman because you can go far, but not too far. You're always aware of the limitations, and for an academic or a creative person, it would be extremely frustrating to know that you could express yourself only in certain ways and with such restrictions. I mean, again, going back to Raif Badawi, look at what happened to him and other very innocent people who were not doing anything violent or any great dissident activities. So, for example, the campaign for allowing women to drive, you know, many women in Saudi Arabia ended up being,
Lujain al-Hadlul, one of
yeah.
the most prominent figures
So
for the feminist movement in Saudi Arabia,
really,
yes.
now I'm also an artist at heart, and to be able to express myself is essential to my very being. I wouldn't want to exist on this planet if I couldn't express myself without any restriction whatsoever. If I wanted to, except my own self restrictions. And so I could never live in a repressive society like Saudi Arabia or China, Red China for that matter. I couldn't live there. And in Putin's Russia, I could never live there. Even Cuba, which I visited for 3 weeks a few months ago, which has a lot of freedom, is it's very limited. And then if you do the wrong thing, you're in prison. You're given very harsh imprisonment. And so there are many, many countries that have this public relations campaign to put a nice service on something which is very ugly underneath.
This takes me to the last one of my last questions and points is that the Saudi government has been trying to whitewash with many uh, public relations company their neom ideas or um, even vacationing or tourism in the kingdom. I think my first experience seeing an American wanting to live in the kingdom was Sam. Um, you think, I don't know if you know this, but just past Ramadan, four or three of the most prominent porn stars in the LGBT community from Spain visited the historic Jeddah during Ramadan on tourism visa.
Hmm.
Now, I don't know if the kingdom knew that, but it seems like there is actual move for the kingdom to try to attract Westerners, white privileged Americans or white Europe, privileged Europeans, to come and show them what Saudi Arabia can best provide for their tourism. Um, how can this be dangerous for Americans as much as how can it implicate other people on human rights violations in the kingdom in the future? Do you think Saudi Arabia is going to struggle with all of that?
Yeah, again, you can go to a certain point, and then if you pass that point, you are subject to imprisonment. If you're a Saudi citizen, you're subjected to amputation or death or flogging or all sorts of abuse. If you're a visitor and you are caught in any sort of uh, activity which they consider blasphemous or haram, then you will, at the very least, you'll be quickly ejected from the country. I doubt that they knew that these visitors were openly uh, porn stars or whatever, but they're very interested in putting a nice sheen on their country for so they can get the monies not just from the massive amounts from the pilgrims that go there uh, for the Umrah or the
Hajj.
Hajj, but the massive amounts of money from tourism would allow their country to not be so dependent on oil exports.
Hmm.
And again, it's in a lot of nationalism. Mohammed bin Salman is very much interested in removing the negative understanding that the West and the rest of the world has of his country, especially after the slaughter and dismemberment of Khashoggi and other things. My When I finally revealed the photos of the flogging of Raif Badawi a few months ago, I did that only with the uh, concurrence and agreement of his wife, by the way. So I waited until she felt that it was
Oh,
appropriate.
wow.
And so I've been in contact with her for many years, and I didn't want to go against her wishes. And so he was finally let out of prison after his 10 years sentence was up. But now he's in house arrest, so he can't see his two
Yep.
children or his wife.
Hmm.
So this is all, unfortunately, the masses of in the world are not very well informed. Very few of them listen to the news, or if they do, it's just local news or news that has a certain slant. And so regimes like the Saudi regime are allowed to flagrantly lie and cover up and create this aura, this false aura of positivity, and get away with it.
Hmm.
And same thing with China for the last few years until recently. Uh, so
Yeah, well, we all remember that the Biden administration said that they're going to make Saudi Arabia pariah. And right when oil became tight, all of U.S. interest has gone through B plan and C plan to change anything that has to do with human rights violations in the kingdom and everything to do with securing a stable economy for the world and the U.S. economy. So it's very obvious where people's priority Lay. Um, I remember that you left the State Department around the Trump administration, number 45. Is that correct?
Well, no, I got the Foreign Service allows people, officers, to stay in the service until they reach the age of 65. So I reached age 65 last November, and then I had to leave. I had to retire. So I'm retired now. I'm I don't have a portfolio per se, although I'm on the boards of directors of a number of human rights and animal rights organizations. But I was able to stay in the Foreign Service almost 11 years in spite of various episodes, and I'll write about it someday. Uh, Various things that I did, which not only raised eyebrows but caused me to not receive prompt promotions. I had a number of meaningful assignments in Washington, D.C., and I'm very thankful for that. I was able to use my language skills in Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic a number of times on a number of assignments. And the fact that I was even allowed into the Foreign Service after being arrested before as an animal rights activist in the early 90s is a mystery and a sort of a miracle that I passed the FBI tests to be allowed into the Foreign Service. But I believe we're all here for a reason, you know.
Is there any message that you'd like to give to any Westerner who's planning on visiting the kingdom or the Arab Gulf?
You know, my older daughter worked in Palestine for 2 years, and she kept pleading with me, please come and visit. You know, I want you to see where I'm teaching and helping the. I said, I am not going to step foot in any Israeli airport. I just, there are certain things that I will not do. And so I do not endorse anybody going to Saudi Arabia or any other hostile regimes, the UAE. I believe if you're a citizen of a country and you should know what's going on behind the scenes. Every country practically has a darker side, and you need to expose that. You can't abandon your citizenship necessarily, unfortunately, but we all need to expose the most egregious offenders of human rights. And so I do not endorse anybody going to Saudi Arabia for any reason whatsoever. I don't think that there's any reason, religious or tourism, to go to a country like that and support their government in any way. Unless they're going to expose it, unless they're going to go undercover and expose it, like I did in Cuba, where I went there and I interviewed a number of communist politicians, and I exposed the hypocrisy and the truth. So that's the only justification I can think of. I would not recommend anybody going to Saudi Arabia for tourism.
I think that's a very strong message, John. I'd love to hear from my co-host AJ, and if any of the listeners have any questions they'd like to bring up to Mr. John Elliott, they're more than welcome to press on the mic and uh, ask a question. My friend AJ is also someone from Saudi Arabia living in the United States. Usually my space is quite full, but it's quite late in the kingdom. So this is definitely going to be saved and posted on YouTube and on Twitter Spaces. You're going to be able to watch and hear this space with details. I'm more than happy to link your website, John, and any other social media you'd like me to, and the thread and as well as my YouTube channel. AJ, are you with us or are you busy?
Yeah, hi, Wuji. I would like to thank you about this opportunity to speak to Mr. John, and I would like to welcome him. It was great hearing about his experience in the Middle East and especially Saudi Arabia. Um, Unfortunately, I don't have any questions, but it was interesting to hear about his experience and the things he like watch and experience there, especially the lashes of Raif Badawi. And actually, I do have a question, to be honest. Yeah, I just remember it when he started talking about it. I said like, since he's like in the crowd with the people watching that event, um, so how can you describe the people reaction for that incident? Are they like happy about it? Are they like cheering or saying like stuff like Allahu Akbar or whatever? Or are they just like shocked seeing it?
Yeah, so I write about this on my blog in thehumanpulse.com, and I was very dismayed that there was no outcry amongst any of the 400 or 500 people assembled there. I think they were all women and I'm sorry, they were all men and boys. There were no women. Um, there was no there was no real emotional reaction except on the 50th uh, blow when Raif Badawi moved away in pain, knowing that it was the final blow for that week. Except everybody, I would say probably half the people erupted in Allahu Akbar, and then they just disassembled and walked away, as if this was some sort of a sports event and perfectly normal. I guess a lot of them were relieved that it wasn't an amputation or a uh,
Beheading.
beheading. Exactly.
I witnessed my first beheading at the age of 10 in the kingdom. Three
Yeah.
men and one woman, right at the same square that you're talking about.
Geez. Well, you know, I the lengths to which humans go in depravity does not surprise me anymore. I've seen or I've heard about or read about so much. I'm just feel personally relieved that I didn't have to experience either war or such horrors or atrocities personally.
Yeah,
I bet it was
that's
appalling for you
oh,
to witness that. Go ahead, AJ.
no, I think it's like a sad thing. The reaction of the people. I never like witnessed anything myself. I lived in Saudi Arabia for 30 years. I never witnessed anything like that. But from your description, it seemed like Middle Ages. You know, back in Europe when people have nothing to do and just like cheer for you know events like that. So it's sad in the 20th century in Middle East we still have this um, kind of behavior is going on. Yeah, that's making me really sad.
Agreed.
Well, my last thing to ask is if you have anything other than that that you'd like to share with the audiences, John. And then I think we are wrapping up on time for this episode.
Yeah, I I try not to focus too much in the distance and the horrors of the world. I keep my eyes right in front of me, and various things come across where I believe it's important for me to take action. Um, that's the only way that somebody who is aware of tragedies and difficulties can can deal with them psychologically. I feel I went to Haiti in 2010, and I worked with victims of their horrible earthquake, and I felt like this was something that I could do and I should do. But there are many other tragedies in the world that I would like to help in, but I just can't. Or right now, I have a 5-year-old; she's almost 6, and so I have to focus on being her daddy. But there are many other things that I believe that I will get involved with. For example, the abuse of the Moroccan government against the Sahrawi people of Western Sahara is on my radar. I'll be going there in November for a few weeks to document the suffering, the decades-long suffering of these people who were exiled from their country. Um, and so my advice is to anybody who is interested in improving the world is keep your eyes peeled and do what you can, and don't feel bad if you can't make global changes or massive changes, and be ready to use whatever talent or tools or skill sets you have to reduce suffering. That's what I'm all about, is reducing suffering.
Thank you. This was John Elliott, all the way from Florida, United States of America, former U.S. diplomat and artist, and an international human rights activist and animal activist. Thank you so much, all, for tuning in. Like, subscribe, and share. Make sure to press the reminder button to follow up with all the new details that we have here. I look forward to seeing you again. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Waji.
Thank you.
Thanks, Woji. Thanks, John.